Hello, everybody. I am Mrs. Poppet, and this is my place. I am so happy to see you again today, for I have a wonderful story for story time today. It is called The Shepherdess and the Chimney Sweep. Have you heard this story? Well, I think you're going to like it very much. The Shepherdess and the Chimney Sweep. Have you ever seen an old wooden cupboard, quite black with age, and ornamented with carved foliage and curious figures? Well, just such a cupboard stood in a parlor and had been left to a family as a legacy by the great-grandmother. It was covered from top to bottom with carved roses and tulips. The most curious scrolls were drawn upon it, and out of them peeped little stags' heads with antlers. In the middle of the cupboard, on the door, was a carved figure of a man who was most ridiculous to look at. He grinned at you, for no one could call it laughing. He had goat legs, little horns on his head, and a long beard. The children in the room always called him Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goat's Legs. It was certainly a very difficult name to pronounce, and there are very few who ever received such a title, but then it seemed wonderful how he came to be carved at all. Yet there he was, always looking at a table under a looking-glass, where a beautiful, pretty little shepherdess made of china stood. Her shoes were gilded, and her dress had a red rose for ornament. She wore a hat and carried a crook that were both gilded too, and she looked very bright and pretty. Close by her side, a little chimney sweep as black as coal, also made of china. He was, however, quite clean and neat as any other china figure. He only represented a black chimney sweep, and the china workers might just as well have made him a prince, for they had just felt inclined to do so. He stood holding his ladder quite handily, and his face was fair and rosy as a girl's. Indeed, that was rather a mistake, as it should have had some black marks on it. He and the shepherdess had been placed close together, side by side, and being so placed, they became engaged to each other, for they were very well suited, being both made of the same sort of china, and being equally fragile. Close to them stood another figure, 3 times as large as they were, and also made of china. He was an old Chinaman, who could nod his head, and used to pretend that he was the grandfather of the shepherdess, although he could not prove it. He, however, assumed authority over her, and therefore, when Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goatlegs asked for the little shepherdess to be his wife, he nodded his head to show that he consented. "You will have a husband," said the old Chinaman to her, "who I really believe is made of mahogany. You will be the wife of Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goatlegs. He has a whole cupboard full of silver plate, which he keeps locked in secret drawers." "I won't go into the dark cupboard," said the little shepherdess. "I have heard that he has 11 china wives in there." "Then you shall be the 12th," said the old Chinaman. "Tonight, as soon as you hear rattling in the old cupboard, you shall be married, as true as I am a Chinaman." And then he nodded his head and fell asleep. Then the little shepherdess cried and looked at her sweetheart, the chimney sweep. "I must entreat you," she said. "Go out with me into the wild world, for we cannot stay here." "I will do whatever you wish," said the little chimney sweep. "Let us go immediately. I think I shall be able to maintain you with my profession." "If we were but safely down from the table," said she, "I shall not be happy until we are really out in the world." Then he comforted her and showed her how to place her little feet on the carved edge and the gilded leaf ornaments of the table. He brought his little ladder to help her, so they contrived to reach the floor. But when they looked up at the old cupboard, they saw it was all in an uproar. The carved stags pushed out their heads, raised their antlers, and twisted their necks. Major General sprung up in the air and cried out to the old Chinaman, "They are running away! They're running away!" The two were rather frightened at this, so they jumped into the drawer of the window seat. Here there were 3 or 4 packs of cards, not quite complete, and a doll theater, which had been built up very neatly. A comedy was being performed in it, and all the queens of diamonds and clubs and hearts and spades sat in the first row fanning themselves with tulips. And behind them stood all the knaves, showing that they had heads above and below, as playing guards naturally have. The play was about two lovers who were not allowed to marry, and the shepherdess began to cry because it was so much like her own story. "I cannot bear it," said she. "I must get out of the drawer." But when they reached the floor and cast their eyes upon the table, there the old Chinaman was awake and shaking his whole body, till at once down he came on the floor. Plump! "The old Chinaman is coming," cried the shepherdess in a fright, and down she fell on one knee. "I have thought of something," said the chimney sweep. "Let us get into the great potpourri jar which stands in the corner. There we can lie on rose leaves and lavender, and throw salt in his eyes if he comes near us." "No, that will never do," she said, "because I know that the Chinaman and the potpourri jar were lovers once, and there always remains behind a feeling of goodwill between those who have been intimate as that. No, there's nothing left for us to do but go out into the wide world." "Have you really the courage to go out in the wide world with me?" asked the chimney sweep. "Have you thought how large it is and that we can never come back here again?" "Yes, I have," she replied. When the chimney sweep saw that she was quite firm, "My way is through the stove and up the chimney. Have you courage to creep with me through the firebox and the iron pipe? When we get to the chimney, I shall know how to manage very well. We shall soon climb too high for anyone to reach us, and we shall come through a hole in the top out into the wide world." So he led her to the door of the stove. "It looks very dark," said she. Still she went with him into the stove and through the pipe, where it was dark as pitch. "Now we are in the chimney," he said, "and look, there's a beautiful star shining above it." It was a real star, shining down upon them as if it would show them the way. So they clambered and crept on. A frightful steep place it was, but the chimney sweep helped her and supported her till they got higher and higher. He showed her the best places on which to set her little china feet, so that they reached the top of the chimney and sat themselves down, for they were very tired, as it may suppose to be. The sky with all its stars was overhead, and below were the roofs of the town. They could see for a very long distance out in the wide world, and the poor little shepherdess leaned her head on the chimney sweep's shoulder and wept till she washed the gilt off her sash. The world was so different from what she expected. "This is too much," she said. "I cannot bear it. This world is too large. Oh, I wish we were back safe on the table again, under the looking-glass. I shall never be happy till I'm safe back again. Now I have followed you out into the wide world, and you will take me back if you love me." Then the chimney sweep tried to reason with her, and spoke of the old Chinaman and of Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goatlegs, but she sobbed so bitterly and kissed her little chimney sweep till he was obliged to do just all she asked, foolish as it was. And so, with a great deal of trouble, they climbed down the chimney and then crept through the pipe and the stove, which they were certainly not very pleasant places. Then they stood in the dark firebox and listened behind the door to hear what was going on in the room. As all was quiet, they peeped out. Alas! There lay the old Chinaman on the floor. He had fallen down from the table as he attempted to run after them, and was broken into 3 pieces. His back had separated entirely, and his head had rolled into the corner of the room. The Major General stood in his old place and appeared lost in thought. "This is terrible," said the little shepherdess. "My poor old grandfather is broken to pieces, and it's our fault. I shall never live after this." And she wrung her little hands. "He can be riveted," said the chimney sweep. "He can be riveted. Do not be so hasty. If they cement his back and put a good rivet into it, he will be as good as new, and be able to say many disagreeable things to us as he ever did." "Do you think so?" she said, and they climbed up on the table and stood in their own old places. "We have done no good," said the chimney sweep. "We might as well have remained here instead of taking so much trouble." "I wish grandfather was riveted," said the shepherdess. "Will it cost much, I wonder?" And she had her wish. The family had the man's back mended and a strong rivet put through his neck, and he looked as good as new, but he could no longer nod his head. "You have become proud since your fall broke you to pieces," said Major General Field Sergeant Commander Billy Goat Legs. "You have no reason to give on such airs. Am I to have her or not?" The Chimney Sweep and the Shepherdess looked piteously at the old Chinaman, for they were afraid he might nod, but he was not able. Besides, it was so tiresome, always telling strangers he had a rivet in the back of his neck. And so the little China people remained together, and they were glad of the grandfather's rivet, and continued to love each other till they were broken to pieces. Isn't that quite an interesting story? I know that these two China figures really loved each other, and they really wanted to be together, and they were even engaged. But the grandpa didn't know that, and so he was giving her to somebody else. Now, they did what they could to try to get away so they could be together, but they realized that things were different than they thought they would be, so they decided to come back home. Sometimes it's better to just stay at home and try to talk to people about what's bothering you, because oftentimes things can be settled just by talking. And when they ran away, they found that out. You have to trust the people that love you, and you have to really let them know how you feel so that everything comes out well in the end. Anyway, I hope you liked that story, and we'll have another one tomorrow.